Mommy, sorry, Melly, sorry, Mommy, sorry, Melly, sorry. Oh, hello, I didn't notice you here. It's been, what, 3 days since the last analysis and I'm already coming out with a new one? Well, while there is going to be plenty of original stuff in this video, it isn't completely new because I made several mistakes in the last one and I also want to correct those, as well as make a few clarifications and expansions on points that I talked about. I do not, however, think that you need to watch that video prior to this one, as anytime I need to correct a mistake or explain something, I'm just going to explain what I was talking about before. So while this will be very scattershot and not cover every single thing we see in the trailer, I do think it's going to still be comprehensible by someone who has not seen the previous video. So this one's going to be way shorter. It's completely okay to watch this before you see the longer one. Besides watching the reveal trailer itself, the only required reading for this is an understanding that there will be plenty of spoilers for Xenoblade 1, 2, and their expansions, because there are going to be, it's a sequel to both of them, as well as a recommendation to check out the introduction letter to Xenoblade 3 from Executive Director Tetsuya Takahashi, as well as a quick read-through of the Nintendo UK page for the game, as the former contains some supplemental development information and slight teasers for things that might happen or be thematically relevant in the game, and the latter has a lot of info that the North American site does not, including names and small bios for several characters that don't have any official information about them in English anywhere else. I basically just have a bunch of unsorted bullet points of things I want to talk about. They're in no particular order in terms of the trailer or in terms of category, so like stuff that I didn't think to talk about, and mistake corrections are going to be mixed in with other observations, so there's not really going to be a lot of rhyme or reason to this. However, I am starting production of this video roughly a day after the initial analysis came out, and I've read every single comment on it so far. That was like 400 comments, so I'm not going to properly remember usernames or anything like that, but I did get some ideas, and some comments corroborated ideas I had but didn't say in the previous video. So basically, if I talk about something in this video that remotely resembles a comment you made on my previous analysis within the first 24 hours of it being up, there is a good chance that I was influenced by it, so please consider this my formal thanks for your input, even if I'm not mentioning you by name. Without further ado though, let's go, because I have a lot of bullet points, and I really do want this to actually be shorter than the previous video. Starting out with 2 mistakes, because it turns out that the literal first thing I said in the other analysis was wrong. I noticed that the ESRB rating was rating pending, and I said that there was a very small chance that Xenoblade 3 was going to be rated M, as it seemed to go for a slightly maturer tone than 2 had, at least on the surface, and Monolith had talked about wanting to make a mature rated game in the past. However, they heavily implied that that game was not going to be part of the Xenoblade series, and as multiple comments pointed out, the European trailer shows that the game has a provisional PEGI 12+ rating, which is the equivalent of an ESRB-T and the same rating every other Xenoblade game has had. So yeah, I have literally zero reason to think that the game is going to be rated anything other than T anymore. The second mistake I made was the pronunciation of the name of the Xenoblade 1 derived nation. I, for some reason, trusted Google Translate to pronounce a Hebrew word correctly when I could have literally just looked at what the Japanese spelling of it was and got a good idea for how they wanted it to be pronounced. And yeah, it turns out that what the Japanese had is significantly closer to what the multiple Hebrew speakers in my comments said. It is not Kevesh, it is something a lot closer to Keves, which I'm certain I'm also getting wrong, but I'm a lot closer. I don't expect the dub to get the Hebrew pronunciation correct perfectly as well, but I want to make the best effort, and especially to not say something that's directly opposite of what the dub is probably going to go for. I was also wrong when I said that keves meant lamb. It actually just means adult sheep. I did see at least one web page that did list it as lamb, which in hindsight I think was actually describing a specific dish that had lamb and had keves in the name of it, so my bad on that one as well. I am guessing that they wanted to have the sheep symbolism between the names of the 2 nations either way, just because that is religiously significant and Xenogearsly significant, and that for the Xenoblade 1 nation, they specifically chose keves over any other Hebrew word that could refer to sheep, including the word that just means lamb, specifically so the 2 countries' names would start with A and K when written in English, as that is a massive parallel to Xenogears that I refuse to believe happened by accident. One detail in the trailer that I did not point out is that whenever characters are shown playing the flute, there are these motes of light floating around. The color does not seem to be significant, as both blue and gold motes show up at different times when Noah is playing, and while further away they do seem to be circles, closer up you can see that there's some sort of cube thing with a smaller central light in the middle, And as all of the Flute players appear to have the position of Offseer, which is a special soldier who has the job of mourning the dead who have fallen on the battlefield, aka seeing the dead spirits off, I'm pretty sure these are just the typical media shorthand of floating lights being representative of the souls of the dead, and just spirits in general. Whether or not these motes of light are literally the souls of dead people ascending to another plane, or just a metaphorical representation, or something ether or magic related that happens when Offseers play the flute, remains to be seen and is the domain solely of theory, which I don't have right now, so yeah, that's just another thing. I haven't seen any alternative interpretations of this, that just is what it is as far as I can tell. Speaking of Noah, he's a swordsman with black hair and a ponytail who likes to wear a coat. Noah may be an Uzuki. For those of you who don't know, Dunban is not the first instance of a similar design to him in the Xeno series. While yes, Dunban's design was obviously the inspiration for Lao in Xenoblade X, and a lot of Lao-related stuff made its way into Jin in Xenoblade 2, there were actually two previous characters before Dunban that he got a lot of DNA from. That being Jin Uzuki from Xenosaga, and Citan Uzuki from Xenogears. It is worth noting, Noah uses a straight sword, while everyone up through Dunban did use a katana, but that might just be because you can't make a katana Minato. We don't see any. They're all straight swords in the trailer as far as I can tell. And even if Noah's last name is not actually Uzuki, his design and general sensibilities may be a reference to this ongoing archetype, and the fact that he's the protagonist only strengthens that idea, as Jin's sister Shion Uzuki was the main character of the Xenosaga series. Basically, this is a sequel to Xenoblade 1 and 2, which were the only Xeno games that didn't give all of their characters' last names, so there's a decent chance we'll never learn Noah's last name, so until we get an official last name for one that isn't Uzuki, I am going to headcanon that he is an Uzuki. If we do assume that Noah's design has Uzuki influence, then we may also be able to extrapolate that he is a descendant of either Fiora or Dunban, as Dunban was the Uzuki equivalent in Xenoblade 1. Of course, if Noah is in fact an Uzuki by name, then that would probably also make Dunban and Fiora ones, but I'm not holding my breath. In the trailer, Mio, the new cat girl who looks basically exactly like Nia, has a line where she talks about all the time someone has left. This is presumably referring to Noah, as their relationship seems to be a key part of the plot, and the two of them are on screen when that voice line plays. I would like to emphasize that although this does seem like it might be referring to the lifetime of a flesh eater compared to a human, because a flesh eater could die randomly or just degrade at any moment, I doubt this is the case, and this probably does have to do with the whole clock motif that pops up later on in the trailer, as Mio is a new flesh eater. We had zero indication that she existed in Xenoblade 2, and again, we see Nia later in this trailer. Towards the back half of 2, after revealing herself as a blade, Nia does consistently bring up the possibility that she might just keel over and die and nobody could do anything about that, but she didn't. She's still alive here. Agnes has a lot better looking technology than Allrest did at the end of 2, so I would assume that if that was still a worry, that they would have come up with a way to prevent flesh eaters from decaying and dying, and there's also the possibility that Mio is actually Nia's biological daughter, and I doubt Nia would have kids at all if there was remotely a chance of them decaying like she had a chance to. So I'm almost certain this has to do with the potential clocks that people have that track their remaining lifetime, and nothing that has to do with her being a blade, as we have zero indication that the blade system is the same as it was in Xenoblade 2 in this trailer. There are no drivers, as far as I can tell. A lot of characters in the trailer have the exact same tattoo somewhere on the body. I initially thought that only Keves characters had them, and that this was a mark that they were part of the military of that nation, as we can very clearly see them on Noah, Lanz, and Uni, as well as several other Keves Offseers in one scene. However, it does turn out that characters from Agnes do have them as well. You can barely see it on the right side of Mio's neck in her official art, and in one shot you can also see it on the top of Senna's left arm just below her shoulder. Editing Luxon coming at you with some additional info, it seems that Taion does have the tattoo as well, because in this shot you can actually see a dark spot on the inside of his hand, so it does look like he has it. This could be something else, but I kind of doubt it, and does sort of back up the theory I'm about to talk about here in the previous recording, as not only do all 6 playable characters have the tattoo, but they all have it on a part of their body that's exposed in both of their outfits. This means that there are now 3 things that both nations have in common. The first is the position of Offseer, as both Noah and Mio are ones, and they even have their own color-coded flutes that match their nation's color scheme. The second is these tattoos, And the third is these loading symbol rings that appear on all of their weapons. These rings appear where the Monado art symbol would be on every replica Monado-derived weapon, and where the core crystal would be on any blade-derived weapon, so this is clearly a very important part of the world, and I'm assuming that these tattoos, these rings, and the clocks that keep getting mentioned are connected, and that in order to fight in this war, you need to get the tattoo, receive a clock that tracks your lifespan, and have that embedded into your weapon somehow, and participating in the war is the only way you can live, fighting just to live and living to fight. And this is probably some sort of necessary evil that Melia and Nia both see as required in order to preserve the world or keep it from further falling to ruin, probably from fog beasts. I'm gonna say that a lot. If you look at the tattoo in full, which is most easily seen in Unis official art, it does also appear to technically be Zohar-shaped, and the one red square in the middle is basically exactly where the eye would be on the Xenosaga version of the Zohar, so if the conduit does play into this game whatsoever, and I have no reason to assume that it won't, this might also be connected to that. Future Luxon again, as there's one other kind of interesting thing. You know how I talked about the other Keves Offseer that has the tattoo, indicating that it's probably a military-related thing? Well, their tattoo appears to be different from every single tattoo on a party member, as all of them, at least all of them we can see completely, do have 5 different diamond-shaped things on them. Usually only the middle one is red, and this is true for every single party member who we can see most of the tattoo of. This Offseer, though, actually has 2 red squares instead of 1, so this tattoo's appearance may also connect to something related to the clocks, or be a symbol of rank in the military if it is indeed a military thing. All of the party members do seem to be young adults, while this character seems older, so it would make sense if they outrank all of them, and that the tattoos just stay on them even when they leave the military because they can't take them off. Moving on to the guy that suspiciously looks a lot like Van Damme from Xenoblade 2, there's a lot of speculation as to who this character might be. My personal theory is that this is just a brand new character who's either a reincarnation of 2's Van Damme, or just another guy named Van Damme, because there has to be one like that in every Xenoblade game. He seems to be some sort of neutral character in the war between Keves and Agnes, and it looks like he's going to be the one to bring the parties of Noah and Mio together, and task them to go to where the Meccana Sword and Orion Titan are lying in order to find the real enemy and stop this conflict. He is also one of 3 characters to wear a mask in the trailer, as Melia and Nia also have them and they seem to be the leaders of their respective nations, so the fact that he's taking one off in his shot might suggest that he's the leader of some sort of neutral third faction, or some people trying to stop the war, or he's just wearing it as part of his battlefield gear. 2 speculations for who this might be beyond just 2 Van Damme or new Van Damme are an older version of Zeke or Rex, also from Xenoblade 2. Zeke largely comes from the fact that he's a muscular guy, has a similar skin tone, gray hair, and an eye patch, and Rex because Rex looked up to Van Damme a lot and clearly idolized him, so him taking after his mentor in appearance in his old age is a reasonable possibility. However, one of these is very, very easy to rule out, beyond the fact that the voice actor is Van Damme's and not either of the other 2 characters. That is with eye color. Rex has an extremely distinctive eye color among all Xenoblade 2 characters, and the only other people who have anything remotely approaching his eye color are Nia, Laura, and Mio, the last of whom didn't even exist when Rex was first created. This new Van Damme appears to have dark brown eyes, which should almost immediately rule Rex out. Unless the lighting is playing tricks on me, then he just has the same eyes as 2 Van Damme, which is not surprising because he already has the same scar, general face structure, and hairstyle as him, but it is also possible that because of the lighting, his eyes are actually a dark gray, which would line them up with Zeke. However, I do still think that this is a new character or a reincarnation. I pointed out that Senna looks like she could be a descendant of both Morag and Brigid in my previous analysis, but some people mentioned that she also bears some similarities to Cassandra from Xenoblade 2, as those 2 are at least both hammer-based blades, and Senna's ether lines far more match up with Cassandra's than they do Brigid's. That being said, if she has any direct connection to anyone, it's going to be one of the 2 major characters from Xenoblade 2, and not a random rare blade that you have a distinct chance of never having seen in any of your playthroughs, because there's only one fairly obscure way to get her, but the possibility does still stand. In the last video, I mentioned that the way of collecting items on the field appears to have gone back to Xenoblade 1 and X's item orb style rather than 2 and Torna's collection points, which would be a good thing for field skills not being an issue, but a bad thing for being almost impossible to actually control the type of item you get, However, I didn't notice that the spacing out of these item orbs is a lot different than it was in any of the games that had them. Using this one desert shot with a fallen arm in the background as an example, we can see that there's one item orb just on a rock on the left, another one on a small ledge on the right, and then 3 right next to one of the trees. Layouts like this are my primary reason for thinking that it's not using a 2 style of collection, as in this scene, if this was Xenoblade 2, the one on the left would be some sort of mining ore type point, the one on the right would also be that, and they're fairly far apart, so that's not unreasonable, and the one on the tree would be a botany-related thing where you, like, get stuff out of the tree. However, 3 collection points on one tiny tree like that is not anything that happens anywhere in 2, so something like this is really only something that makes sense if this uses 1 style collection points. However, I think these collectibles are spaced out a lot better than they were in 1 and X, and it may indicate that they're using the better way that 2 distributed its collectibles, where in 1 and X, yes, the odds of a certain item orb containing a certain collectible are influenced by where in the area they are. In 2, 1 collection point spawn location will always yield the same type of item when you pick it up. So if there are 3 item orbs right next to a tree, then it might be possible that all 3 of those item orbs are guaranteed to give you a tree-related item. It's also worth noting that in Torna, they even added a little icon that explicitly showed you what type of item you get from a collection point, and it's obvious that none of the UI elements are present in any of these trailer shots, so there might even be a small icon indicating what type of item a collectible is that we're just not seeing because the UI isn't there. So, as much as I liked collection points, this does seem like it's already going to be a much better version of item orbs than any previous game had, and I'm hopeful that this is still going to be good. If there are field skills relating to collectibles, it's just a passive thing, like you might all of a sudden get 2 items instead of 1, and especially that the Collectopedia is returning, because that was a sorely missed feature in 2. The key visual of the Mechonis sword being buried into a mountain next to the Orion Titan with a massive gash in it is really striking, and according to Takahashi was something that was thought up of before they even started creating Xenoblade 2, you know, the game with the Orion Titan in it. But if you think about the way Xenoblade 1 and 2 ended, it doesn't really make sense. And that's because Zanza cut the Mechonis' sword in half when he awoke in Xenoblade 1, and yeah, I can tell the amount of the sword that is above ground in the shot in 3 is more than the hilt part that was still remaining, so it's not just the part that was left is stuck in the mountain. And the Orion Titan is shown merging into the side of a landmass at the end of Xenoblade 2, so it being on top of a mountain in dry land is really weird. So this lends credence to the possibility that when the universes came together, they didn't literally just take the end of 1, the end of 2, and plug them together, and especially that 1 and 2 didn't just straight up end on the same planet. So it seems like there was some sort of time shenanigans involved when the universes came together, as the Mechonis sword is rebuilt and the Orion Titan is in a completely different and weird, not congruent location, as well as the fact that post both games, there is nothing big enough left in the world to lift up the Mechonis sword and cut Orion in half in the first place, and all the mechs we've seen are far too small for such a feat, so it really seems like there is at least a little bit of time wackiness that went into the universes merging, and with Ionias meaning everlasting and all the Ouroboros symbolism, it might be some sort of time loop or just something is not right with time, and one of the resolutions to things might involve re-splitting the universes in some way, as well as the fact that, yeah, it does seem like the Offseers and the clocks and the whole endless war might be something to preserve the world and keep it from falling apart, which is one of the easiest ways for Melia and Nia to potentially justify this war, which seems out of character otherwise. And now we're getting into a segment where I just kind of talk about various voice lines in the trailer in different languages, as not only is there a Japanese version of the trailer with the Japanese voices of the characters, and all 6 party members actually have had their Japanese voice actors tweet out confirming that they're playing a character, which is already cool, but since the game isn't getting any dubs besides English, various European Nintendo channels uploaded the English version of the trailer with subtitles in another language, which means that in instances where we don't know what someone's saying, we can directly see what at least another language version of the script says that line is. Several comments pointed me to things said in the Italian version of the trailer. However, I don't know any Italian, but I do know just enough Spanish to be able to BS my way through with help of a translator, so I looked at that version, And I also had 2 different amateur translations of the Japanese trailer provided to me. So special thanks to @AngelusWingsHK on Twitter and Wayori in my Patreon for providing me with 2 different translations from 2 different people, but I think they're both right because they both almost completely agree with each other. Lands, the Machina guy, has a voice line that says, "I refuse to believe you're him." In the Japanese version of the trailer, he says, "Is this the real you?" That is, without any masculine pronoun, which basically means that this line is even more confusing and out of context in Japanese, and while it may still be referring to Noah, I don't think it is, so this is either just a trailer hype line that is disconnected from the scene. I still think it is still said in the cutscene that's being depicted there, but it could also have to do with someone visually transforming, reincarnating, or aging a lot. Machina in Xenoblade 1 age much slower than Hams, so people have theorized that it is his reaction to a grown-up Noah, but he sounds way too angry to be like, "Yo, hey, childhood friend of mine, as confirmed by the supplemental material, you're so much bigger and you're a fighty boy now, that's cool." He sounds angry, so he's clearly talking to someone he's either upset at or fighting against. I interpreted the Van Damme line before all the landscape shots as talking about Sword March, which seems to be the area where the Mechanis sword is stuck in the ground, and it turns out I was correct in that interpretation, as basically every language uses a different portmanteau of sword, plain, or plateau to refer to that area, so yeah, he is definitely talking about where the Mechanis sword is. However, we still don't know if that is just one area that the party is trying to get to, like the World Tree in Xenoblade 2 or Prison Island in Xenoblade 1, or if all of the explorable areas that we've seen so far are parts of Sword March. And this is a much bigger toss-up than you'd think, because the areas seem to be a lot more interconnected than I thought, and it's very possible that every single explorable area we've seen so far in the trailer is interconnected in some way, which sort of feeds my agenda that this is taking story and lore from 1 and 2, but a lot of gameplay inspiration from X. I thought that the voice line, "You can try to move forwards again," was actually Rex speaking and an indication of a flashback or him actually returning in the game somehow, but if you switch to Japanese, it's very obviously just Noah talking. There's a scene between him and Mio on screen when he says that, so I'm guessing that this is being said to her. A lot of the voice lines in this trailer indicate that they have some sort of history between them and were friends to some degree, and it seems like Noah is just going to be some sort of inspirational force helping her to move forward from some bad thing that happened in the past, and, you know, presumably because we see them together in, like, all the other shots in the trailer, they're not going to stay enemies and are going to be friends. I'm guessing the whole party is going to be close friends by the end of this. Yeah, whatever. It's not a big deal. The party in a JRPG is going to like each other by the end. That's not exactly a difficult prediction to make. In the English version of the trailer, Melia says, "Ouroboros abhor this world," and when you combine that with the fact that everyone has clocks on their weapons, and once you see characters from the 2 nations together, they actually have Ouroboros symbols where the clocks used to be, it seems like people from each nation coming together causes something to happen that causes people to dislike the world in some way. Presumably they see it for what it is and realize the truth that the war is stupid and needs to be stopped, and for some reason Melia wants the war to keep happening, and that's the whole plot idea I have. This is the best I can parse from what we've seen so far. However, in the Japanese version of the trailer, Melia does not use the word Ouroboros. She simply says something about people who want to take revenge against the world. So, Ouroboros dislike the world, people who want to take revenge against the world. There's a connection there. Also, to back this up, the Spanish version of the trailer uses Los Ouroboros, and Ouroboros is capitalized, so it seems like Ouroboros is not the neutral organization trying to stop the war, as I had initially thought. It is a proper name for a group of things, presumably people who have Ouroboroses on their clocks, and that they're the ones who are going against the current world order, and since we see Ouroboroses on weapons of almost every single party member, it's gonna be the party. Mio has a voice line where she says, "No matter what life is lost, I won't let you shoulder this burden alone," and it seems like she's talking to Noah and referring to the burden of whatever adventure they're going on. I initially interpreted this as her saying whatever life is lost, not whatever lives, and that she was just referring to time on the life clock on their weapons running out, and not people directly dying. However, basically every other language is more closer to no matter who dies and something like that, so this is much more of a generic "I'm going to support you on your journey, and we're going to make it through no matter what it takes." This does make this less interesting and much more of a generic trailer line, but this not directly relating to the clocks does not diminish everything else related to the clocks. Uni refers to filling up the clocks not being any good in their eyes because it won't replace the people they've lost, And Mio says the flame clock needs to be destroyed when fighting a giant robot. In all of the subtitled versions of the trailer, both clock and flame clock are capitalized, and flame clock is a different portmanteau of something related to fire and clock in different languages. The Japanese name, I believe, actually references sundials, not regular clocks. So they are definitely some sort of proper name and not just referring to something that looks like a clock, and Mio's line explicitly states that the flame clock needs to be destroyed. So I'm pretty sure on my guess that every fighter and every machine from both nations has a clock in some way, probably related to remaining lifetime, and that at least on the big thing Noah and Mio are fighting in the trailer, destroying it is a weak point. Possibly just hitting it reduces the time, and it's my guess that you need to defeat other people to extend your own clock, which is where fighting to live and living to fight comes from, but that's mostly just an educated guess and not anything backed up directly by the trailer. I just mentioned Unis' clock line, so we're going to transition out of the voice line related stuff and talk about Unis' design. Her official art depicts her with lightish blonde hair and white wings, but depending on the shot, her hair ranges from the same color in the art to a darkish brown, and her wings range from the same white in the art to almost black. This could just be an instance of Masasuku Saito's coloring style not being picked up exactly by the modelers when they created Unis' model in the game itself, or him just coloring the art a little bit differently than they decided to make the character in the game, because there are a few discrepancies with his art and character models in Xenoblade 2. It could just be a lighting thing affecting Uni weirder than a lot of the other characters, or it could be that her hair and feathers actually do change color throughout the story, possibly related to various plot developments or her mood. You've heard of mood rings? Now it's time for Unis' probably less than half Highentia mood wings. Patent pending, you probably can't buy them in a store because I don't want to cut them off her head. In this one shot of Lanz running through a desert next to what seems to be a giant Keves mech and small military encampment, I first pointed out this enemy grazing by a plant, but I didn't recognize it as a Camille from Xenoblade 2 and Torna and thought it was a new enemy. So, in apology for not recognizing it, I'm going to give this one a name. We're going to call him Henry Camille, and you bet that once the game comes out, I'm going to take a screenshot with him. You can also see an item orb right next to the plant it's eating, which again backs up my possibility that even if they're not doing collection points, they're putting orbs in very specific locations to tell you better what's going to be in them. As for other returning enemies, I'm a Finch enthusiast, so of course I only noticed the birds, and I was able to point out Flamise, Taus, and Quadwings in my initial analysis, but if we go back to the Mio in desert scene, we can in fact see that there are also Volfs, as well as something that might be related to X further on in the background. We do also get to see a bunch of really cool brand new enemy designs here, but I wouldn't be surprised if there are a lot of returning enemy types as well, especially since, again, it's a sequel to Xenoblade 1 and Xenoblade 2 at the same time, so especially iconic enemy species that have appeared in both previous games are really likely to show up. I'm citing Arachnos and especially Gogols as the most likely to appear first thing in a future trailer. I do hope we get a lot of new enemy designs too, though, because the few that we have seen look really, really cool, and I like this seeming trend to having a lot bigger normal enemies, unless I guess all three new ones we've seen are unique monsters, but I hope that's not the case. While I'm pretty sure Noah's sword is just a custom version of a mass-produced Monado replica type weapon like all of the other things the Keves military seems to be using, it is possible that it does have some Aegis sword inspiration as well, as the center of the blade does glow the exact same green as Pyra's sword does, so there might be some technological or intellectual cross-pollination between the nations despite the war. Noah might have roots in both nations and not just Keves, or just because he is the major of the two protagonists and Mio is a protagonist but the secondary one, he has to have some design elements from both previous games that are being referenced. While we're talking about Noah, I made a really big deal to point out that basically everyone in the Keves military has a belt with the same kind of disc on it that Shulk's future connected outfit has, and some supplemental material explained that that belt disc is actually connected to his replica Monado and is used to power it, and since all of the soldiers seem to be using Monado replica technology, it makes sense for them to have the same disc. We also see that every single one of the 6 main party members has 2 outfits in the trailer. They have one that seems to be a military uniform for their nation, and another one that seems to be their adventuring garb that they put on once the 2 parties come together, and that's what they're likely to be wearing as their primary outfit through most of the game. I also pointed out that of the 3 Keves characters, Uni is the only one to visibly show that she still has her energy disc on in her adventuring outfit, which wouldn't make a lot of sense because Noah and Lanz's weapons are also very obviously using replica Monado technology, But we can see that Noah has some sort of harness on from the front in his official art, and if you look at basically any shot of him from behind, you can see that that harness is actually just attaching his energy disc to his back. My guess is that closer to Shulk than Rex, he's going to sling the sword over his back when it's sheathed, and that it's probably going to somehow magnetically attach to the energy disc, which, let's be real, is a much better justification for a weapon magically floating behind someone than any other game in the series besides X. Here we have a little segment I like to call Taion Tuesday, even though it's Monday, because I have a bunch of small things to talk about Taion. You've noticed that now, out of the 6 main characters, he is the only one that I can't find the tattoo on, which is largely because it doesn't seem to be on his hands like Noah, and also like Noah, almost his entire body is covered in both of his outfits. I don't think he doesn't have a tattoo though, because again, I'm pretty sure the tattoos are connected to the clocks, and his weapon obviously does have a clock, and we even see it in Ouroboros mode in another scene, so he probably has one that we just don't get a look at in any of the shots in the trailer, and if anything resembling Fashion Gear returns, we're probably going to be able to put him in his underwear. I have seen multiple people excited for that possibility already, and in that case, then presumably we'll be able to see it there. In my previous analysis, I posited that because the symbol on the tattoo is also on the 3 in the Xenoblade 3 logo, this was an indication that Noah was going to be the more important of the 2 protagonists, because all of the supplemental material indicates that Noah and Mio are the main characters of the story, and while a lot of people wanted a dual protagonist thing, and I really hope that the beginning of the game is going to involve swapping between 2 different parties before they actually come together and the main story happens, but that was based on the fact that I only thought Keves characters had tattoos, and we now know that Agnes characters do, 2 out of the 3 Agnes party members do, and I'm sure the 3rd one does as well. So this now significantly increases the chances that Mio and Noah actually are going to get similar amounts of screen time, and it's not going to be lopsided in any way, and to a lesser degree increases the possibility that the symbol itself is going to mean something and isn't just the tattoo you need to get to have a clock installed in you and fight in the war. I also have some haha funnies related to Taion. When you see him in the trailer, it's pretty clear that his weapon is making origami birds and controlling them, but the funny thing is, if you look at his official art, the way it's folded looks a lot more like a Napon than a bird, so that would be really funny if slight stick up his butt tactics man just can make Napon, because Napon are the comedy relief race, and that's funny. It's funny when the serious guy has to witness funny things. In the other video, I also thought that he was voiced by the same person who voiced Akos and HB from 2 and X respectively, as he's very clearly the same character archetype as them, and even does the exact same push the glasses up thing in one shot in the trailer. But as I said before, the Japanese voice actors for the 6 main characters are all confirmed, and that is not the case. However, I do think he's going to carry the torch well. May he never stop excelling. If you know me at all, you know that I'm a very strong proponent of pun-based art names, so I really hope that since he can do origami birds, he's going to have some bird-themed stuff. He's from the Xenoblade 2 Nation, and I'm going to headcanon him as a big fan of Akos's plays until I find out otherwise, which means that he might have some knowledge of members of Torna. So I'm hoping that he's going to continue the swallow symbolism that Jin and Laura had in a lot of their arts, and I also really, really hope that if he has a desperation type move, or an ultimate attack, that it's called Swan Song, and has a more powerful effect the lower his HP is, because that would be perfect, and I need more pun art names. We don't have anyone that seems to have dual weapons in the trailer, so we better get someone, and they better have an art called Double Down, where it's 2 hits, the second hit does more damage, and it also inflicts topple, because that's like a 3-layer pun, and we need more 3-layer pun attack names. Give it to me. I demand it. A thing I brought up in the other video was that since it seems like there are 4 party members on the field at the same time in this game, that we're going to have 4-person combat parties, which is a little bit weird because we only know of 3 playable characters from each nation, and I thought that, oh, maybe if some people really like a nation, they might want a party of people only from that nation. So my first party member theory is that there's going to be at least 2 more playable characters, and that 2 are going to be one from Keves and one from Agnes, just so you can make a full party of characters from one specific nation. I also mentioned that of the 2 new Napon characters, the guy on the left with the bad Rex wig is dressed in Keves-looking clothing, and the girl on the right that looks like Ricky-ish is dressed in Agnes-looking clothing, and some people thought I didn't put 2 and 2 together and think that those 2 were going to be those new characters, one from each nation, but yeah, they seem to be in the same scene as the one where Taion and Uni are doing something together, so it's very possible that they do join the party after that, and at the very least, they're probably going to be guests when you go through that desert area. There are multiple very conspiracy theory board-esque posts of people trying to put all of the locations we see in the trailer together, especially based on some of the wide shots we got, like Noah running across the distant fingertip, and it seems like at the very least, the more Ardain / Sword Valley-esque area next to the Fallen Arm, the distant fingertip, and several of the Plains-esque areas, as well as maybe the Magna Forest, are all loaded in, or at least visible from the same location, which is really interesting and far more interconnected than Xenoblade 1 and 2 areas were, which again might suggest we're gonna have very few loading screens like X did, because, you know, X had like 2 loading screens in the entire overworld, which is ridiculous but also kind of amazing. And they did that partway through the Wii U's lifespan, so now that they're way more familiar with the Switch, it's very possible that they could just pull something like that off way better. Yes, I know, Breath of the Wild was a Switch launch title worked on by Monolith and was super interconnected and only had loading screens for shrines and divine beasts and stuff like that, but keep in mind that was developed on the Wii U first, and it seems like that they were working on that at least at the same time as X, if not directly after, so yeah, on the system they started developing it for, they knew what they were doing. While we can't say that all of the areas are connected and not separated by loading screens, I can tie 3 more trailer shots together. There's one shot of Uni giving her impassioned speech about filling up the clocks. There's one shot of Senna running through a very Agniratha / Colony 9-esque city that is almost certainly part of Keves, and there's one of Mio grinding rails through some floating islands. We can see the bottom of a floating, very Machina-designed structure there, and that seems to be not only the same city we see Senna running through, since the sky seems the same there, but also the same city Uni is standing in, based on the buildings in the background of her. It is possible that this area, besides obviously the Xenoblade 1-esque floating city, is derived from More Ardain, as well More Ardain did not have floating islands, and again this is more Oblivia from Xenoblade X than anything. More Ardain was the only place that had grind rails in Xenoblade 2, and the ground terrain does distinctly resemble that from More Ardain. I don't know if they're going to put a lot more grind rails in 3 than they had in 2, because 2 had very, very little, and they actually just reused the sliding down a water slide animation for the grind rail, so it's a nice way of saving assets there, but if they're going to have animations for that, maybe there's going to be some water sliding as well. So you know how I like to talk about how the Fog King was just a premonition of a greater threat, and you know how Melia said that exactly in Future Connected, indicating that something like that will be in Xenoblade 3? Well, there's some more stuff to back up that there are some fog-related things in this game, as in a couple shots we can see a purplish fog very resembling that of the fog beasts. It's possible that this is a thing that you can go and clean up as a side activity. My guess would be you go in that area, it infects an enemy, turns it into a unique monster type thing, and you have to beat it, or that it's just somehow related to the plot in some way. But again, my main theory is that the war is in some way a distraction or a way to stave off an incursion from fog beasts, which is why Melia and Nia are participating in it, and the party is going to, like, say, hey, war bad, let's stop the actual threat, which is why they're going to Sword March, and Sword March is either going to be the origin of the conflict, as it's a thing from Xenoblade 1, seemingly having damaged a thing from Xenoblade 2, or just where the fog beasts have come from. They're going to find out the truth, and they're going to put a stop to it. Going back to the Nopon, people have said that the one I keep calling Ricky's descendant, which doesn't really make sense since she's the one with the Agnes clothes, looks also a lot like Beta Pyra, which led to people theorizing that since the other one has a Rex wig, that they're actually reincarnations of Rex and Pyra. But I personally don't buy that because, quote-unquote, Pyra is seemingly wielding a Poppy-esque shield weapon, and quote-unquote Rex has a gun, which don't fit either of those characters, as well as the fact that not Rex has blue eyes, when a distinctive part of Rex's design was the fact that he has a specific eye color, which is not that. There is also the possibility that they somehow heard of the story of Rex and Pyra and are choosing to emulate them, but I think they might just be designs that unfortunately happen to line up with things, though it is very possible that the Rex wig has some sort of Rex-related backstory to it, because that's going to be a very, very stupid character design choice if it doesn't have to actually do with Rex. In the Aerith C. Leftheria combo-looking area, we see 2 instances of new movement options, the first of which is almost explicitly confirmed, and the second of which is only a possibility that people are theorizing about. The first is, of course, the fact that we see a boat seemingly under control of the player, so at the very least you can charter a boat to take you around places, and you're just gonna have to sit and watch while you go through, but it should make for a lot of really, really nice screenshot opportunities, and they better include a photo mode like they should have in X, let alone 2, let alone Torna, let alone Definitive Edition. I want a photo mode. Anyway, the boat is super cool, but it's also possible that some form of underwater diving might be in this game as well, because in the swimming section, we actually see Mio go into a dive animation, and for a couple frames before it cuts to the next scene, the camera does pan down, which is something that actually never happened when falling into water in any other Xenoblade game, even if you jumped off from a great height and sank really, really far before coming back up. So it is possible that some sort of underwater exploration is a thing, or you can just dive and do a swimming animation to go faster, suggesting sprinting might be in the game, and the camera just moves to follow your character a bit better. It is worth noting that Mio is the character doing this, and we don't see any of the 3 party members behind her do any sort of dive-looking animation like she does, so either they're staggered behind her, or this is a party leader or even a Mio exclusive thing, which suggests that characters might have unique overworld actions, sort of similar to field skills, but are more closely related to movement and traversal. No, I can't think of what any other characters would have other than Taion being able to create stepping stones with his birds, because Mio jumps off of them at one point in the trailer, and since Mio uses Dromark's weapon and Dromark is a tiger, then she might have some sort of swimming ability that the other characters have, possibly being diving. If she has water elemental powers as a flesh eater, then it's possible that she might have water mastery and be able to dive because of that. It is also possible that there's an invisible field skill checkpoint that they just deleted for the trailer, and that she's using it there, so there are a lot of possibilities, but the fact that diving seems to be a thing that you might be able to control with a button press does remain. Either way, it seems like we're getting new movement options for water areas, and with how miserable the original Aerith Sea was to navigate in long stretches, that is a very, very welcome change, and honestly, I like fun movement options, so I don't even mind that it's possible that they're going to have less skip travel points, because yeah, there were some areas in Aerith Sea that were really annoying to get to without skip travel, and one in Colony 9, Chugga Conroy, if you're watching this, I hate Agora Shore just as much as you do, but if instead of just giving you a skip travel point there, they make getting there more fun to control, then that's also a win-win. In the last video, I talked a lot about potential returning characters that we haven't seen yet, and my general consensus was we're getting at least one of Vinaya and Linata. Tyrea and Taion are going to absolutely be there if we see anything related to Melia at all beyond just the ominous scenes of her seeming villainous, and that Pyra and Mithra are probably also going to show up, and at least one of them is going to be playable. The biggest character that I didn't mention whatsoever is Poppy, and she's where it gets interesting. First off, we have an Appon wearing Xenoblade 2 Nation clothes that seems to be wearing a similar shield to the one Tora uses with Poppy Alpha, and there's also the fact that she is an artificial blade, which means she's absolutely not going to go back to her core crystal when Tora dies, and seems to possess the possibility to resonate with anyone else, including people who aren't capable of being drivers. Plus, she is an robot, which means she has the possibility to live for an extremely long time if maintained properly, so if any descendants of Tora exist, there is probably going to be some version of Poppy still around, and the scary thing is the time when she made Mithra promised to destroy her if it ever seemed like she was going to destroy the world, and I don't want a sad Poppy, so hopefully she's still happy and doing fun things and going on fun adventures with Tora's descendants, because that's much more preferable than the time where you do have to play as Mithra is fighting some sort of corrupted evil Poppy. Please don't make that happen, because I don't want to see Poppy cry, because that would probably make me cry, and you don't want to see me cry. Editing Lux in here one last time, because I found a single blurb that appears to be the only thing, barring Japanese voice actor announcements, that has no English counterpart anywhere in any version of Nintendo's site. And it's literally just a tiny 2-sentence blurb about the world of Ionias. And I'm just going to put the machine translation up on the screen, and it says, "The magnificent nature of Ionion," it's just a mistranslation of the name, no big deal there, "is dotted with giant protists," presumably that's just creatures, "and giant mobile weapons. Iron giants, colony, where the army lives." This is extremely interesting, especially because we have shots of a mech from each nation with a small encampment around it, so it suggests that there are actually small detachments of soldiers from the 2 nations that go around the world looking for fights, each with one big mech near them, and that mech has an ability to, like, set down and create a little shelter for them in order to make camp during the night. This is a very interesting piece of world building, and since, again, I bet that all of the main characters are on the run from both nations, you might be able to run into camps like that, and if you see the soldiers, they might, like, activate the mech, and you'll have to start fighting it, and that's another sort of world boss that's a bit more dynamic than just see unique monster, go to unique monster, kill unique monster. Really exciting stuff, and I think it's also just a really neat bit of extra world building that they did not have to do, but I'm excited for all the same. They also use the phrase Iron Giant, or at least a Japanese phrase that translates to Iron Giant, which makes sense because we have Mechon from Xenoblade 1 and Artifices / Sovereigns from Xenoblade 2, so this new combined world is probably going to need a new name for mech, and each Xeno universe has a different name for mech, so it makes sense that they're going to come up with a new one, and yes, I know, Ionias is a combination of the one world and the two worlds, so technically it isn't a brand new one, but it still makes sense. And there is a song in Xenogears that's used for mecha boss fights called Steel Giant, so this Iron Giant name may actually be a reference to that. This is going to be my last talking point, because I have discovered clear evidence that one other character is going to be returning, this time from Xenoblade 1. And that is Rein. Do you know why Rein is returning? Take a look at this first scenery shot of Noah running through a field. Do you see that in the background? That one thing that I'm zooming in on right now? Yeah, that would not exist if Rein was not some way involved with this new world of Ionias, so clearly, he does have to return. I'm gonna let that one stew in your minds for a bit. Until next time, this is Luxon, signing off.